here from Backroad Buddies, and the video we want to share with you today is about our Alaska expenses. Now, everybody's expenses is going to be different, and there's a lot of variables that go into it, but we're hoping we give you enough details that will help you plan your own trip to Alaska. So we'll start off by giving you an idea of what our trip looked like. So these are the dates. We left on March 30th and returned on October 15th. And we kind of split up our time between the lower 48, Canada, and Alaska. So we spent 43 nights, or over a month, in the lower 48 before crossing the border into Canada. And then on the way up through Canada, we spent about 31 days. And then we kind of dipped into Alaska for the first time down in Skagway and Haines for a few days. And then we were back in Canada for a few more days before reaching Alaska. And then we were in Alaska for 67 nights straight. And then Canada on the way back down for about a month. And then in the lower 48 for a few weeks before getting back home. And here are the miles we covered during each of those segments. So we're going to break down these expenses into the lower 48, Canada, and Alaska for you. So this is what that breakdown looks like in the three sections. So we were 60 nights on the road in the lower 48 altogether, 68 nights in Canada, and 71 nights in Alaska. So that gave us a season total of 199 nights, or 200 days. And here's the miles. So we did the most miles actually in the lower 48. And about 5,700 in Canada and 3,900 in Alaska. So that was the lowest number of miles, which gave us a total miles for the season at 17,294. Now, our largest expense was gas. Now, we have or at that time had a Van Do-It camper van based on a Ford Transit passenger van. And we get about, I think we got about 12.7 miles per gallon. So if that gives you an idea, and that's regular gas, not diesel. So if you run diesel and DEF, you got to factor that in as well. So these are our totals for the different segments. As you notice, they're pretty equal. We actually had less of an expense for gas in Alaska, but that's mainly due to the miles. And you can see that by how many gallons of gas we went through. You can see that most of the miles were actually in the lower 48. And we were going during a time where gas prices were high, but they were also fluctuating quite a bit. So if you notice, our lowest price per gallon that we paid for, and by the way, these are all US dollars and gallons and miles, and not Canadian dollars, liters, and kilometers. So just so you know what the numbers are. So our lowest price per gallon was $3.45 in Broomfield when we got back home, but this fluctuated a lot. When we had left home in Broomfield at the beginning of, at the beginning of the season, the price per gallon was well over $4 a gallon. So it fluctuated quite a bit while we were on the road. So we had the lowest price in 48 and the highest price in Canada at $8.15 per gallon. But if you notice, our averages weren't, they were higher in Canada and Alaska. So it was $3.94 in the lower 8. We averaged $5.87 in Canada and $5.28 in Alaska. So our overall season average was $4.84. So if you notice, Canada was the highest, followed by Alaska. But some of that may have just been timing because the prices were coming down later. The next largest expense item was lodging, which in our case was campground fees. Now, we stayed in a variety of campgrounds, from private to even mooch docking off of relatives' driveways, and kind of a lot in between. Mostly we tried to stay in state parks, national parks, and in Canada, provincial parks. So that helped bring the cost down. And we normally did not have hookups. We didn't really need hookups, although we did stay at some of them. So yeah, as you notice, you know, in the lower 48, so we spent $1,700, $1,800 in Canada, and the most in Alaska, $2,500, for a total of $6,093. So if you think of it per night, our average in the lower 48 was $29 a night, in Canada $26 a night, and Alaska $35 per night. So that was our more expensive. And so our total season average was $30.62 per night. Our highest actually were a couple of them were KOAs. We did not get the KOA membership or plan. We probably should have looked into that. It might have saved us some money. But we don't stay at KOAs a lot. But you have to work out the math to see, you know, how many days you're staying in a KOA and whether it makes sense to join or not. So that was $63 a night in Leavenworth, Washington, and $66.95 in Seward, Alaska, where we stayed a couple nights there. And then also another expensive one was Watson Lake in the Yukon Territory at $43.53 per night. And that's not much of a campground. It's basically a parking lot, but it did have hookups, so I think that's what you were paying for there. So our season average was, well, the high was $66.95, which was that Seward, Alaska KOA. Now, the third biggest chunk of expenses was actually all the excursions we went on. And we went on a lot of them. When you go to Alaska, you don't have to go on excursions at all, but we kind of didn't hold back. We really wanted to experience a lot of different things. And we did some excursions in the lower 48 and Canada as well. So that really added up, although the most expensive excursions we did were in Alaska. So they included things like just simple little things in the lower 48, the Grassroots Art Center in Lucas, Kansas, the Cosmos Sphere in Hutchinson, Kansas, the Crazy Horse Memorial in South Dakota, the Heimkamp Center in Moorhead, Minnesota, which is just across the river from Fargo, North Dakota. And then in Canada, we did a lot of gondolas. So we did the peak-to-peak gondola in Whistler. We rode the gondola back down at Sea to Sky in Squamish. Took the Dredge No. 4 tour outside of Dawson City. Toured the SS Klondike in Whitehorse. We did the Northern Lights Center in Watson Lake. The Quezon Museum in Hazelton, British Columbia, the Jasper Skycam gondola ride in Jasper, Alberta, the Lake Louise and Moraine Lake shuttles to get there for hikes in Alberta, and we did the Banff gondola in Alberta as well. And then the most excursions and most expensive ones were in Alaska. So we did a guided glacier hike at Matanuska Glacier. We did the Anchorage Trolley Tour. We did the Alaska Native Heritage Center in Anchorage. We rented an e-bike for the day, and we included that in our excursions. So did a nice bike ride in Anchorage. We did the Lulu Bell Glacier Cruise in Valdez. The Bald Mountain Air Tour to Brooks Falls over in Katmai National Park, and that was the most expensive of our excursions, but it was also the most memorable experience we had, watching the grizzly bears fish at Brooks Falls. Then we went on the Kennecott History Walking Tour, where we got to go in the copper mill in near McCarthy there in Wrangell St. Elias National Park. In Fairbanks, we went to the Tanana Valley Fair, which is, they call it a state fair. I don't know why there's 3 state fairs in Alaska, but there are. So there's one in Fairbanks. We also in Fairbanks, we did the Riverboat Discovery Cruise. We did the Fountainhead Antique Auto Museum. Oh, and we did the Arctic Circle bus tour from Fairbanks, which bussed us up to the Arctic Circle. And that was probably our least favorite tour. I mean, yes, it was nice to say we were in the Arctic Circle, but, you know, the scenery on the way, we didn't really see any wildlife, and it all kind of looks the same getting up there. So nothing real exciting other to say that you've been to the Arctic Circle. In Denali National Park, there were a few things as well. We did the Tundra Wilderness Tour, which is a bus ride all the way out, well, at least to where the park road closes. We also paid for a Tech Pass, which is a bus pass. When you camp at Teklanika Campground, you're not allowed to drive your vehicle around. It's past where the public access is on the park road, so you actually have to use a bus to get around once you're camping there. And we also did a discovery hike, so we had to pay for the bus to get to the discovery hike because we were no longer at Teklanika Campground. We were at Savage River. And then another kind of highlight was the Denali Peak Experience flight, which starts actually outside of Denali National Park, but then flies over the park and flies over to the Denali, the mountain. So that was really a nice experience, but also expensive. And then we finished off our excursions in Palmer by going to the largest state fair, the Alaska State Fair there in Palmer, and also visited the muskox farm there in Palmer. Now, this is the summary of all of our expenses. So you notice here was the gas I was talking about earlier, and the lodging and the excursions. So you can see we didn't do many excursions in the lower 48. Our lodging and our gas here. And then the next couple categories are dining out and groceries. We included in dining out not just the meals we ate out, but also all the snacks and drinks and pastries and chai lattes and all that kind of sort of thing. And that was all included in the dining out expense item. And then the groceries were not only all the food items we bought at the grocery stores, but everything else we bought at the grocery stores, like supplies, like paper towels and trash bags and even, you know, cold medicine and that kind of thing. So that was all included in groceries. So if you notice, we spent a little bit more money on dining out than we did on groceries. So it depends on how often you eat out and how much you make meals on your own. We generally, I think on average, would eat a meal out about once or twice a week. So if that gives you an idea, and then we'd prepare all our other meals in our camper van. But then we actually did a lot of snacks and drinks and cinnamon buns and ice cream. So that's kind of what pushed that up. Now if you notice, you know, we spent, if you combine actually these two food items, it's actually the biggest chunk of your budget. And that's the thing you kind of have the most control over, because you can actually eat a lot cheaper. And that's the most variable expense you can have. So it depends on how, you know, what meals you eat, what types of foods you eat, and how you prepare them or you go out. So you can, that's really the biggest chunk of expense that you can really affect a lot by being careful. If you notice, we did a lot of eating out in Alaska. Now the prices are a little higher in Canada and Alaska because there are a lot of remote locations. So expect that. So if you know how much you spend at home, I would add a factor in there, because it's going to be more in Canada and Alaska, but not huge amount, but still be prepared for that, and you can control that. This next category, miscellaneous, was actually our cash that we didn't track where we spent it. Now that wasn't a whole lot of money, it was less than $1,500, but I wish we would have tracked our laundry because we paid cash for laundry, so I didn't really have a good handle on how much we paid. Again, you'd probably want to allocate a little bit more for coin laundry in Canada and Alaska than you would in the lower 48. But unfortunately I didn't track it. Our guess would be it was at least $500 for the season, but obviously it was less than $1,500, so that at least gives you a range. And then also to account for is ferries. We actually took several ferries, and let me show you what those are. So we took a ferry over to Vancouver Island and one back from Vancouver Island. We also took one from Skagway to Haines and one from Whittier to Valdez. Now if you're scheduling in ferries, make sure you look at the schedules because not all of these run every day of the week, and there's limited times and limited ferries. Not so much on Vancouver Island, but these other ones between Skagway and Haines and Whittier and Valdez. Also included in this line item was we did 2 train day passes to take the commuter train into Vancouver when we were there. Now the next item on this list is souvenirs. We don't buy a whole lot of souvenirs, so we bought a few t-shirts, stickers, and I also included binoculars on this. We bought a pair of binoculars while we were at Denali National Park, so that was like $95, so that's where a lot of that came, and the rest I think were t-shirts. So not a lot. It depends on what you like to do. If you like buying a lot of souvenirs, then obviously you'll want to up that. Kind of one of the smaller things on here is parking tolls and park entrance fees. So in if you notice, Alaska was pretty low and Canada and lower 48 were higher. Well, that's mainly because in the lower 48 we bought a South Dakota annual pass because we knew we would take advantage of that. And in Canada we did a Canadian National Park annual pass as well because we were visiting enough that it made sense. The rest of these items we didn't break down into the 3 segments, we just added them into the total. The first one here is vehicle maintenance. Now here's the breakdown of where that money went. Now what you'll need to have done on your vehicle will probably be totally different, but I would make sure you budget in something for that because the roads are hard on the vehicles. You're going to have cracked windshields. You're going to have wear on your tires, and you could have all kinds of problems. So make sure you budget enough money for that. So we actually bought another windshield repair kit because we used one because we had a chip on our windshield. We did, we were gone 6.5 months, so we actually did an oil change, replace the engine filter, normal maintenance. And then when we were in Anchorage having that maintenance done, they noticed how bad our tires had gotten. So this includes 2 new tires. We really needed 4, but we couldn't find 4 that we wanted to put on there. So we just replaced the 2 worst ones, so we knew we could safely make it back to the lower 48. And wiper blades, windshield washer fluid. We also have a locksmith on here. We locked ourselves out of the camper van one morning and had to call a locksmith. Now, if we had thought about it, our roadside assistance should have paid for that, but it didn't cross our minds at the time, so we actually paid that out of pocket. So going back to this summary here, we did have a Garmin InReach subscription. Garmin InReach is a satellite communicator, so you can send text messages. It also has an emergency SOS. And we actually upgraded it so we could actually leave breadcrumbs along while we're hiking or something, and it keeps track of our GPS location. But there are times especially on the way up through Canada where you aren't going to have cell service. So we actually travel with this all the time, but we normally use a more basic plan when we're in the lower 48. But we use it to stay in touch with our kids. When we don't have a cell service, we still can text them and let them know, you know, where we are along in our itinerary and that we're okay. So we just check in with them, especially if we're going on a hike or a remote hike. You know, here we're starting a hike, we've ended the hike, or we're okay. And it sends our GPS location as well. So if they stop hearing from us, they can, you know, notify the authorities and know where our last known location was. So we really think that's invaluable. You'll have to decide whether that's worth it for you or not. There was a stretch on the way up through Canada where we went 5 full days with absolutely no cell service whatsoever. So you might want to think of an alternative to stay in contact with loved ones or whatever, to let them know that you're okay. We also opted to do YouTube Premium, which allowed us to download videos and view them offline, at least on our iPad. It won't work on a laptop, so just be warned. And then haircuts. We don't spend a whole lot on haircuts. I cut my own hair. Keith, I think, did 3 haircuts during this whole season. So, but you know, if you're one that likes to get your hair cut at a certain interval or whatever, so make sure you budget that in. He didn't really pay much more than he normally does, but you know, depending what you like to have done or where to go, you know, you may want to factor that in. And then these other 2 items are really Alaska specific. The milepost, if you haven't heard of it and you're planning a trip to Alaska, check into it. This was kind of our Bible. This has a huge wealth of information on not only Alaska, but all the routes through Canada to get to Alaska and back, and everything along the route, and every kind of detail that you can imagine. We can't recommend that enough. We only put in, so it's like $42.95. It's a great big huge thick book. Once you buy it, you actually have access to the online version or the PDF that you can download. But we found ourselves using the hard copy most of the time and not a soft copy. And we actually bought 2 of them a couple years prior. When we were planning our trip, we bought one and you know, used that to do most of our planning. And then when we hit the road, they put out a new updated version of the milepost every April. And so we bought one that April just to get more updated information. And yes, some things did change. Some things had closed down. So it was good to have that. We can't recommend that enough. This Tour Saver, it's kind of a mixed bag. This is one where, you know, it's $89.99, or at least the time when we bought it. And it'll give you discounts on some excursions. So need to go out and look at what excursions they'll save you money on. They're normally buy one, get one free. So if you're traveling by yourself, it doesn't make sense at all. But you have to look at what you're getting discounts on and how much you're saving to know whether it's worth buying it or not. You also run the risk if you know, planned on certain excursions and for some reason those get canceled. Yeah, the tour operators will give you your money back, you know, especially if it was canceled due to weather. Or in our case, we came down with COVID and had to cancel out a couple of our trips. But you don't get your money back on the Tour Saver. So you may have bought this thinking, oh, I'm going to save money on this excursion, and then you end up not doing the excursion. You don't get your money back from the Tour Saver. So it's a risk, and you'll have to weigh your options and how much you saved. It turned out we only saved something like, I forget what it was, like $39 or something, once you factor in the cost of the Tour Saver and what all we got discounts on. So it wasn't a huge savings. So, but look, maybe a lot of the things that they have discounts on is what you want to do. So make sure you check out the details on that or whether that's worth the money or not. So as you can see the totals here, we obviously spent the most in Alaska, and that's mainly due to the excursions. and then next in Canada, and then the least amount in the lower 48. That's kind of expected. So that was a grand total of $32,851 with an average of $5,000 per month and $163 per day if you want to break it down that way. There were a few things that you didn't see in that cost breakdown, and that's where things here: health insurance, vehicle insurance, roadside maintenance, international transaction fees, and cell phone service. We did not pay any extra than we normally do when we're traveling the lower 48, but it's something to think about and something to investigate. Like our health insurance, our particular plan covered us while we were in Canada. You need to check yours. However, Canada would not bill our insurance directly, so we would have to pay the bill and then get reimbursed from our health insurance later. The vehicle insurance, our vehicle insurance covered our vehicle while we were in Canada. There's also a certificate you need to get printed out by your insurance agent that there's some regulation in Canada to kind of prove you have liability insurance that is valid in Canada. We never had to show it to anybody, but that's something to look into as well. Roadside maintenance, we use FMCA's, I forget what it's called, their roadside assistance, and yes, it covered us while we were in Canada. So if you like to have roadside assistance, you need to check into yours and whether it covers you in Canada or not. International transaction fees is just more something to be aware of. A lot of times banks and credit cards will charge you a transaction fee when you're exchanging money from one currency to another. So this applies to charges you may put on your credit card while in Canada. Now we checked into this. We have 3 different credit cards. 2 of them charged transaction fees on all the transactions. 1 credit card did not. So we tried to make sure we always used the one that didn't charge us any fees, because that can add up over time. We goofed a couple times, but so we did have a few transaction fees, but it wasn't a lot, so be aware of that. Our cell phone service. So on our phones, we have an AT&T plan that worked in Canada, although in Canada we're not on an AT&T network, so we got deprioritized. So there were times where it looked like we had a strong cell signal, but yet our throughput was pretty poor because, you know, the Canadians had priority on their own network. So we also have a Verizon Jetpack, so for a hotspot to kind of give us an alternate cell service. That worked great in Alaska, but our plan with Verizon did not work at all in Canada. In fact, as soon as we crossed the border, it stopped working at all and wouldn't start working again until we crossed back into the US. So those are things to investigate and know if what you have will work or you need to do something different. That's all our expenses. I hope we gave you enough details to help you plan yours. There's a few more details in the blog post, so make sure you check that out as well. Thanks for watching. If you want more details, look in the description below for a link to our related blog posts, so check that out. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. We'd really appreciate it. Ta-ta for now.